Now we're going to go on with the second lecture on quiescent versus active fundamentalism. And keeping in mind that what we mean by fundamentalism, among all the other things that we've talked about so far, is the affirmation of a religious authority as holistic and absolute. That is, that it covers everything there is in the world, admitting of neither criticism nor reduction, and expressed through a collective demand on the part of the fundamentalist believers that specific creeds that they believe and ethical dictates by which they live are derived from Scripture, meaning from God, and must be not only publicly recognized by everyone to be true, but also must be legally enforced. Now, when that fundamentalist group is not in a position of power and cannot see to it that it is legally enforced, or even that it be publicly recognized outside of their own world, their own enclave, their own domains, then they often enter into what is called a quiescent phase. What is the quiescent phase of fundamentalism? Simply stated, it is an unyielding refusal to be moved from their attachments to what they perceive as the tradition, coupled with a structural resistance, meaning having put themselves in a situation where it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to become assimilated into or part of contemporary culture and values that are not fundamentalist. A resolute unwillingness to be absorbed by them. In other words, what quiescent fundamentalists do is they keep themselves apart, set in a separate world, and in effect, they go in an opposite way of the dominant culture outside their enclave. That opposite direction we can call contra-acculturation. But they are quiescent. That is, they don't try to make changes in the world outside, in part because they don't believe themselves able to make those changes. They're politically powerless, or perhaps they are afraid of the encounter. They believe that even trying to make changes outside runs the risk of their people becoming somehow transformed even in the process of the encounter. And so they don't just hold on to their traditions. They actively resist, even though they do it in a quiescent fashion. They actively resist alternatives towards it. And in that active resistance, even though they do it only within their own domains, only within their enclave, this contra-acculturation becomes a means by which they remain outsiders. They are proud outsiders. They don't want to often share in the cultural norms of the society. They might want to speak a different language. They might want to dress a different way. They might want to live in different places. They might educate their children in their own schools. They might be very vigorous in drawing boundaries, in drawing lines between us and them, recognizing that while they, the enemies, may be in power, that nevertheless they will not inherit the earth, as it were. They view themselves as superior, a very important element of quiescent fundamentalism is inculcating their own with the sense that we're different from everyone else, we're better, We're superior. We are not hacks. We are not pragmatists. We are not compromisers. We are not the stars in the world out there, but we are stars in our own world. They often have this kind of holier than thou attitude, believing that we alone hold on to the unadulterated heritage. We alone are the true defenders of the faith. And very often, much of this activity requires controlling the enclave, controlling the borders, not only culturally between us and them, but often physically between us and them, making sure that our schools are closed, our communities are closed. In a sense, the quiescent fundamentalist builds a kind of fortress, a cultural fortress, inside of which this fortress, this enclave, they reestablish or affirm customs, frameworks of meaning, a public order, a social life in which the traditions can flourish. To give you an example, as we'll see when we talk about quiescent Jewish fundamentalists, because Jews have, for much of their history, been powerless. You live in a time when Jews seem to be much more powerful, but for most of their history, for the last 2,000 years, they've been a tiny minority, relatively powerless. What they did in these enclaves of theirs, which were by and large often enforced from the outside rather than from the inside, that is, they were not allowed to be part of the host cultures. But what they did inside their world was to say that the values we hold here are better. We eat different foods, we go by a different calendar, we speak our own language. In other words, they structured their enclaves with their own values and way of looking at the world. In the modern era, of course, those ghettos, and that's what the word is for those enclaves, those ghettos are now not enforced from the outside, but rather from the inside. That is, these people could move outside. What keeps them from moving outside? Not the law of the land, not the law of the host culture, but a conviction that has been nurtured on the inside that our way of life is superior. You don't want to be like the people outside this ghetto. We're talking by and large about quiescent Jewish fundamentalists, the likes of which we're going to find in places like Brooklyn or in certain quarters in Israel and Jerusalem and Bnei Brak, and we'll talk more about them when we talk about Jewish fundamentalism. In any event, what quiescent fundamentalists largely do is they focus their energies on remaining apart from what they view as the contaminating, culturally, religiously, intellectually contaminating aspects of contemporary culture. We will find that in some cases they might see it as the quote-unquote heroic retreat. The true heroes stay inside. The true heroes live life as we live it here. The true success is not success in the terms that the outside world makes. True success is success as we define it in here. We will speak our own language. If the way we look seems outdated, that's fine. We don't want to be in tune. We don't want to be up to date with a way of life that we consider to be illegitimate. So this kind of quiescent fundamentalism is supported by an absolute conviction that the way we live life here in our enclave is the right way. We often feel like we're exiles in our own land. We may even think that the world should belong to us. This becomes particularly important when you find this kind of quiescent fundamentalism inside a society that the fundamentalists themselves believe should belong to them. So for a long time, Christian fundamentalists who were quiescent during the period of really for much of the 20th century, when liberalism was dominant, when progressivism was dominant, when a view of a radical change was dominant, they felt themselves exiled in their own land, just as we'll see Jewish fundamentalists often feel in modern day Israel, that somehow they're not in charge, but that they're exiled in a Jewish society that they feel should be under their control. And this is the same feeling that, for example, many of the Islamists in Afghanistan might feel, or in Saudi Arabia, less so in Saudi Arabia now, but in places where they somehow think that the West took over our societies and we are exiles, we're powerless in our own world, even though our values should be the dominant values. So they remain quiescent, resentful, but as long as they can protect themselves, keep the outside world at bay, answer to their own authorities rather than to the legal authorities of the larger society, then they're okay. But the law, of course, has a way of imposing itself on these closed societies. You can't break the law, even in the closed sections of Brooklyn. You can't break the law even in the back alleys of Jerusalem. You can't break the law even in a Southern Baptist stronghold in some small town in Virginia or West Virginia, or Georgia, or wherever they happen to be, or Lynchburg, West Virginia. And when the law, which is after all the power of the larger host society, when it comes into your world, when it transgresses, when it crosses the boundary that you have worked so hard to maintain, then the cultural enclave doesn't seem quite as fortified anymore. When the fortress which you have built with your own customs, your own language, your own texts, your own way of life, your own language, your own leaders, when that is breached, either because of the law or because of the power of the outside society and culture which has entered through technology, through education, whatever means it gets, then when the outside world, which is so attractive and seductive and open and says, come on in, you can share in our wealth, you can share in what we have, when that world becomes too seductive or too close, then often quiescent fundamentalism becomes far more active. It says, if we cannot remain protected within our enclaves, then we must, in effect, go on the offense. We have to take over. And of course, taking over requires a lot of organization. It requires you to convince the majority that they have been living the wrong life. Or, if you can't do that, you have to look at a moment when the majority is weak, or to use the tools of the majority, whether those tools are advertising, public relations, voting, the army. Take over the army in some cases. If you can convince the army of your values, then you can come to power. If you can convince the electorate of your values, then you can come to power. If the outside world is weak or distracted, you can come to power. So the quiescent group, all the time that it has been in the background in the enclave, they appear less radical, less dangerous. We don't have to worry about them. They're back where they are. They keep to themselves. They seem to be